There's certain interviews that you gun for that you honestly don't know if you're going to get, but you figured why not? Put together the outline. You've watched somebody on TV long enough, and then when that person says yes, it's definitely a great feeling. And I'll talk about that with my next guest, who we'll introduce momentarily. But in the meantime, welcome back to the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 258, 257 aired yesterday. That was a pre-recorded interview. Speaking of people I've chased for a long time, for 5 years, I wanted Bill Bratton, former LAPD, Boston, NYPD commissioner, on the program. Finally, with the help of some mutual friends that we both share, I got him, and he was good. Almost 40 minutes with him. He's a busy guy, but we covered a lot of ground in that time span. We'll cover some ground with my next guest tonight. Two quick sponsors to take care of. First things first, electric vehicles are definitely more frequent to see on the road. And given this man is a firefighter, he knows a thing or two about responding to electric vehicle fires and how to combat them. As electric vehicles become a more frequent sight on the roadways these days, it's important to know what to do in the event that they catch fire. And for firefighters responding to electric vehicle fires, immediate information at that, is imperative. It's a must-have, which is where Scott Saul comes in, because he's created the First Responders EV Rescue app. Again, the First Responders Electric Vehicle Rescue app, which provides on-scene information immediately to safely approach and work on an electric or hybrid vehicle that's caught fire. The more information firefighters have, and the quicker they have it for these type of emergencies, the better. And you can get this app on the Apple App Store, of course, if you have an iPhone, or if you have any other device, mainly an Android. You can get it on Google Play if you go there. What this app does is unique because it not only includes the location of the first, second, and third batteries in an electric vehicle, it also tells you about high voltage fuel cells and cables, ultra high strength steel, jacking and stabilization points, and cable cut areas, and also where you shouldn't cut in the event that you need to extricate somebody out the vehicle. And lastly, high voltage disconnects. So again, that's the EV Rescue app, First Responders EV Rescue app, which you can get on the App Store if you have an iPhone, and Google Play for an Android. Scott Saul created it. He's based out of Deer Park, New York, and this provides immediate information to firefighters responding to electric vehicle fires. Definitely important information. Our next sponsor and final sponsor, of course, Bill Ryan, who is the co-executive and co-creator alongside yours truly of one of the mini-series we have on this program, Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Bombs. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike to New Haven podcast. Okay, sponsors taken care of. Thanks to Scott. Thanks to Bill. My next guest is an astute student of meteorology, active for a long time in the profession. Her work has taken him from Denver to New York City, Pennsylvania, and back to New York again, with stops in Chicago as well, I might add, at WNBC, WABC, if you're talking about a career in New York, and lastly, currently, Fox Weather, where she's currently assigned. And that is someone, like I said, I've wanted for a long time. Finally, tonight, we get her. And it's Amy Freeze, who joins me now on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Amy, welcome. How are you?
Thank you for the great introduction. So excited to talk with you.
Likewise, the pleasure is all mine. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, born in Utah, but raised in Indiana, correct?
Yes. At 6 weeks old, my parents took me to southern Indiana, a town called Jeffersonville, and that's where I grew up. Small town, different kind of tough.
Okay. So tell me, where did the love for both journalism and meteorology at an early age, if at all, start for you?
You know, a lot of meteorologists, especially on TV, will say, oh, I grew up young kid watching the weather. This is not the case for me. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I had a cat flicko growing up, and I desperately wanted to be in charge of animals. But as time went on, I realized that it wasn't all fun and games with the animals. So I let go of that. I started to enjoy journalism and history. That's what I studied in my first go round at university, and I got a broadcast degree in journalism, and I wanted to be a newspaper writer. I actually took the broadcast track because it was the quicker track to get out of school, but I wanted to be a newspaper writer. And so I thought maybe I'd be writing for the Wall Street Journal or the Boston Globe someday. I even did a study abroad in college in South Africa. And I did that with Worldwide Television News during Mandela's election. My whole thing was I wanted to write about the European Union and small factional wars and things like that. How in the world did I make the U-turn into meteorology? Last name Freeze. I was born. So I literally got into a TV newsroom through a friend of a friend of a friend. I got a job. I was a writer. And they kept adding responsibilities. And I said, no, I'll just do this part-time. I'm waiting for a newspaper job. And eventually they said, you know what, will you help us with a new morning show? And I said, well, I could do it for a couple of weeks, but I really want to get a newspaper job. They said, okay, come down. We're checking lighting this week for the new show. And a consultant was in the studio and she said, who's this person? They said, oh, this is one of our writers. But I was performing in front of the new lighting and reading the teleprompter. And they said, well, maybe she could do something about entertainment. And I remember the news director called me into his office and he said, Amy, what do you think about being an entertainment reporter? You would talk about movies and Broadway shows. I was in Portland, Oregon, by the way, at the time. I said, oh, no, I'm going to be writing about, the European Union, and I'm going to be writing about important things in a newspaper. That's what I'd like to do. And he says, well, it would be a full-time job and you would get benefits and it would be a decent job for you. And I said, do I start that when I go downstairs or tomorrow when I come in? So I had my first job as an entertainment reporter, and only when they needed someone to fill in for the weather and they said, Amy Freeze, that sounds like weather. That is where I got my first chance to talk about what's happening in the atmosphere. I had to go back to school and develop a little bit more beyond that. But really, it was by fluke that I got onto television in the very first place.
Talking with Amy Freeze here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. By the way, for those of you in the live chat, if you have a question for Amy that's relevant to the conversation, I'll get to it in due time. Just put it in there. And also, you're encouraged, of course, to donate to the super chat if you would be so kind. And I appreciate all you tuning in via LinkedIn as well. Quick shout out to them: John Costello, Darren Phillips, all the way in Canada, Steve Iarato, Pete Pranzo, retired NYPD street crime lieutenant and author, and John Latanzio, retired NYPD emergency service unit detective, also an alumni of the old New York City Housing Police Emergency Rescue Unit. So the schooling of a meteorologist is quite interesting. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot of different patterns. During that particular section of your schooling, what most fascinated you?
I really liked that the weather was so different. I grew up in Southern Indiana, so I knew that weather pattern of hot, humid, and thunderstorms, the gully washers coming through the West. But when I started to study the weather in the Pacific Northwest, I learned about ice storms. I learned about snow. My college took me through the Rocky Mountains, the Wasatch Front in Utah and Colorado. And so I had learned about these different regions. I started to really fall in love with the changes that weather brings. I love all four seasons. And so that's really the challenge, I think, that drew me to it. I thought, this is cool. It's always different. And I quickly found a match for my personality because it was a little challenging. But at the same time, it was fun. It was something everybody talked about, and it became a match for me. So I didn't grow up measuring the rain or watching clouds go by or anything like that. But ever since I started taking my first classes in meteorology back in Portland, Oregon, I went to the University of Oregon for my very first class. It was Introduction to Oceanography. Ever since then, I have always loved the different things that weather has to offer. There are so many parallels to life, which I could go on and on about, but it's always changing, right?
Oh, of course. Yes. And that's definitely one of those parallels, as you alluded to. Now, it's interesting in that even though I'm sure there's still nerves, naturally being on television, being in front of the camera, even me, I've done 258 episodes of this, counting yours tonight. And there's still some nerves because you want to make sure you do a good job. But even with those nerves, there comes a point in time when you start to feel a lot more comfortable and it starts to become a little bit of second nature to you. What was the point early on in your career being in front of the camera where you started to feel like you had your legs under you?
I remember early on, I was so nervous, Mike. I would take my entire forecast that I prepared, I would write it out, and I would tape it to the walls around me off camera. No one could see it. But I would have the notes that I had written on the sides. And the advice that the consultant said was, imagine someone behind the camera listening to you so that you talk more naturally.
Right.
I don't think in a million years you would guess the celebrity that I chose to be behind the camera when I first started being on TV. Madonna. Okay, I was a fan growing up, and so I imagine Madonna listening to my forecast. That's how I started, and that's how I learned to relax a little bit. I would say I still have a decent amount of anxiety when I have to perform in person. So you think, oh, millions of people are watching you when you're on television in New York City, but when I go and am just in front of a few hundred people, I have a lot more nerves. I have no idea why, because so many more people are watching through the lens, but there's something about that immediate audience feedback that creates the butterflies still today.
Especially now with social media, where that feedback, like you said, it's immediate. It's not like 25 years ago where if somebody had some praise or even a complaint, they might mail the station, or they might email the
Right.
station, since email was around at that time. Now you get a tweet, you get something on Instagram, you get something on Facebook. So it's a lot harder now. And I imagine it becomes more difficult to manage. But if you're a veteran, as you are, a long time one at that, of the broadcasting business, you're able to go with the ebbs and flows a lot easier, even in today's climate.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned, a trick to being on camera, is that when it's live, just like we are right now, when something goes wrong, I just say, well, you know what? This is live TV. So, okay, let's start and do it again.
Right. Things
And
happen.
people can appreciate that real moment because they also feel like they're now a part of it. They're a part of this. And when you leave the script behind, whether it's um, just detaching yourself from the performance and you just allow people to be a part of the conversation that you're in, it relaxes everyone, you as a presenter or performer, and also everybody who's in the audience.
Oh, I agree completely with that. The aforementioned Detective Latanzio in the live chat, tuning in via LinkedIn, mentions he has a question. Has she ever tried tornado chasing? He'd like to know.
Yes, when I lived in Denver, Colorado, I worked for WGN, which is the sister station out west. So Chicago is WGN, and
Yep.
KWGN is the Denver station. So when I was there, I chased the tornadoes on the Colorado Plains. So Denver is in the valley, right at the base of the mountains, basically just outside the foothills. And then you've got the 13ers. But if you go further east from Denver, the Mile High City, you'll find the Colorado Plains. And that is a very active area of tornadoes. And we chase them, believe it or not, by helicopter. We would get into a helicopter and we would go and see the tornadoes. Then we would land, go out to the places that had been damaged. Another interesting fact there is that DIA, Denver International Airport, is located away from the city if you've ever flown in there. But when they settled the airport, which was, I believe, was late 80s, early 90s, since that time, it is the most active area for an airport for tornadoes in the entire country. There have been more tornadoes within a 5-mile to 10-mile radius of DIA than any other airport in the world.
Interesting. Definitely fascinating to know. Amy Freeze, our guest tonight, of course, Fox weather meteorologist, longtime veteran of the meteorology game. And let's talk about that. 1998, you get to KWGN, which is, as you said, the sister station of Chicago's WGN. It's a major market, one of the early, even though Portland's a major market in its own right, you're moving on up and getting to Denver. And it's different covering weather there, I imagine, because of the altitude. They don't call it the Mile High City for nothing. So working in a place like that, where the altitudes may or may not affect weather patterns, you might know better than I would. Tell me about first acclimating to that environment and what you most enjoyed about working in Denver.
Well, I love Denver because my role as a meteorologist was also coupled with hosting a morning show. I was really able to develop my personality there. I learned a lot about forecasting the weather, everything from upslope winds, which can bring the wind up against the mountain range and exaggerate snowfall, which Denver is known for big snowfalls as well as the resorts there. But I also learned a lot about severe weather and dramatic changes in the weather. For example, Denver has huge temperature swings. When a cold front comes through, you could see a 40-degree temperature drop in a matter of hours. So very dramatic changes in the weather is what I learned about. I also fell in love with sports there. I became a Denver Broncos fan while I was there because John Elway was wrapping up his career.
Yep.
And I got invited to Mile High Stadium, not for a football game, Mike, but for a soccer game, just as Major League Soccer was kicking off. And I fell in love with the sport and became what they called at the time the token sideline chip. It's probably bad political reference or PR or whatever it's not politically correct in this day and age, but that's really what I became because I knew nothing about the game of soccer other than it was fascinating and mesmerizing. And I loved the opportunity. I said, I would love to do it. So I learned everything I could about Major League Soccer, and it was kind of a hobby to my weather day job that I had. And I was the first female to ever do American Major League Soccer when it came back to the States in the late 90s.
And you covered it for about 12 years until 2011. So you got to see the evolution of the game. So I imagine you kind of felt like there's the old saying, proud papa, in this case, proud mama. You must have felt like a proud mama, exactly that, as you saw the sport continue to evolve and expand into different markets across the country.
Yeah, it was thrilling. I mean, when I went to Chicago and became a part of the Chicago Fire broadcast team, that was awesome. At that same time, in the LA Galaxy, they brought across David Beckham. And so Beckham was a big part of the expansion of the league at that time. I was able to cover a couple games with him, which really is one of the most thrilling things that I've done in my career outside of talking about weather, is interviewing David Beckham, because he has been so many places and accomplished so many things as an athlete. That was awesome. But to this day, I have fond memories of covering Alexi Lawless as a athlete. Today, he just finished covering the Women's World Cup soccer that happened in Australia. And he's a world-class broadcaster for Fox Sports now. So it's been fun to carry some of those connections over the years to where I covered the athletes who are now broadcasters themselves.
Yeah. And not only that, but, much like 25 years ago, for example, who were household names? Wayne Gretzky, Michael Jordan, John Elway, Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, just to name a few. Now you're starting to see that same level of attention be paid to soccer players. Lionel Messi, Ronaldo, Neymar, Mbappe. They're starting to become household names, which, again, for a sport that was already popular internationally, but not so much in the United States, tells you not only how much, or how far, I should say, the sport has come, but how bright its future is.
And think about this. This is a sport that is so universal. As it came to America, you saw young kids come to the stadium wearing the jerseys of American players that they could attain to their level. Mm-hmm. A lot of kids will never play Major League Baseball. Very few will make it to Major League Football, Major League Hockey. Major League Soccer is something that's attainable for them. And you would see not only boys wearing the men's jerseys, the boys would come in wearing the women's jerseys, and vice versa, because it was such a universal sport that every kid in America was playing on the pitch. They could come into the stadiums and see their favorite players close up. Really cool to have American athletes doing that. And, the league has just exploded. So it was really cool to be a part of it. I'm still a big fan.
Oh, of course, I can see that. I can see the passion in your voice as you were telling these stories. 1999, by the way, is a quick aside, fitness champion. Care to expand on that?
Sure. That happened when I was in Denver, Colorado. Really incredible company called EAS was developed. And the guy who created the company, Bill Phillips, he had this idea that anyone could become a bodybuilder. And it was coming off of the era of Arnold Schwarzenegger. So if you can imagine, there were all these bodybuilders and it was very cool, but people saw these unattainable bodies. And so he thought to himself, actually, it's anybody can, if they're disciplined with exercise and nutrition, can attain a big transformation in their body and have muscle mass. So he started this, and it was a supplement company that he had, but he said anybody can enter. And the very first year he did it, he gave away a Maserati, I believe, very expensive car as this, and thousands of people entered. We came into the contest the second year. And the second year we entered the couples division. And it was a 90-day fitness challenge. The book is called Body for Life. It's still out there. People still do it today. But it was basically a 90-day period to completely commit yourself to health and fitness. Take a before and after picture. Send us your results. I had pretty good results. I won $100,000. It was pretty thrilling to get in shape and also win money at the same time. Some of those principles have served me very well over my adult life when there are ups and downs and you think about like, oh, I'm losing it here. Like, this is hard. But health and fitness really do have their foundation in eating right and exercise.
Of course, of course. And that was something that was really emphasized during the pandemic, where it was especially easy for people to fall right back into those bad habits. Right. But years and years and years of cultivating that discipline guided many through, and they were able to actually achieve even better shape during that time when they were in quarantine, because instead of using it to stuff their face, they had more time to work out.
I was lucky. I had a Peloton. I got it right before the pandemic. I think it saved me.
That's the case with many people. So I believe it's in the spring, summer of 2002, if I'm not mistaken, that you get to WNBC. And this is interesting in that, go ahead.
Yeah, it was actually the Philadelphia NBC. So it was
Okay.
WAU.
Ah,
But I was at that time in Philadelphia getting my first opportunity before the age of 30 to work at the Today Show, still in meteorologist. So I did get some opportunities to come up to New York from Philadelphia, but I really enjoyed working for WCAU. It's a channel 10 in Philadelphia, very well known television station because of the history. And there I hosted a show as well as did the weather with a guy wearing a bow tie named Hurricane Schwartz. He taught me so much about forecasting. He's a legendary personality in the Philadelphia market. And to this day, I think back, there was a time when I thought maybe I was not going to finish my second degree in meteorology. And the reason is a guy I worked for said, you know what, Amy, you got a nice personality. You're going to do fine. You communicate well. You don't need to keep taking the classes. You're going to be able to do the meteorology. And in my mind, I thought, I need to finish this class if it's the last thing I do. I got to have the degree. Because I could not imagine looking back, walking into Hurricane Schwartz and saying, hey, I got a nice smile and a good personality. That would not have flown with him. He was about science and making sure that the forecast was accurate. He taught me many great things while I was there in Philadelphia.
and it was a 2-year stretch from 2002 to 2004, but nevertheless a valuable one. Now, it's different coming from the Midwest or the West Coast out east because, as you know, living in New York as long as you have, and definitely the same thing is true for certain parts of Connecticut where I'm based out of, New Jersey, and definitely Philly, people are more intense. There's a faster pace, and they want to know now. So adjusting from how things are in Denver, where maybe it might be a little bit more laid back, even though it's still a big city, to the Philadelphia way, and you certainly know how Philadelphians can be at times, in a good sense and maybe a not so good sense. Tell me about that particular adjustment.
Well, the secret in Philadelphia is to be a sports fan. One of the very good adaptable qualities is that I am a fair weather fan. All the places I've lived, I've always developed a curiosity and a passion for the sport. So fly, Eagles, fly. That really rapidly ingrained me into the Philadelphia community. Also, I worked with some incredibly awesome people like Vi Sekahema at Channel 10. He was the sports broadcaster there, but quickly took me under his wing. We became fast friends. And through those types of alliances, if you will, I was basically accepted very easily into the Philadelphia television market, had a very successful time there. I actually covered many hurricanes in the field while I was in Philly because obviously proximity to the East Coast. And some of those years, 2004 and 2005 were very active years. I covered Hurricane Isabel, was down in Florida for a couple different storms during those years. And so all of that experience also set me up for later success that I would have in New York City.
Of course, and it's all preparation, right? The flagship, the biggest market of all. But on a side note, you had a role in creating rather something called SWAP, which stands for the Stormwater Action Alert Program. Now, interesting enough, I don't know necessarily it might pertain to flash floods, it might pertain to other matters regarding weather, but it's an interesting creation that allows meteorologists to track these types of things better. Tell me about the idea that first started in your mind to create this and what exactly it is.
Thank you for asking, Mike. A lot of people don't want to talk about it because it involves something called combined sewer overflow, CSO, combined sewer overflow. Think about big cities in America. They were designed, 100 or more years ago. So a lot of the piping or the sewage lines underneath the cities are very old, very small. Maybe there was one or two toilets in a very large manufacturing building that's now been turned into a condo that has loads of toilets, and they all go into a very small pipe. Those pipes become inundated and it's released into waterways. Again, combined sewer overflow, the water drainage system and the sewer going into the same spot. A lot of those are released into rivers. You see why no one wants to talk to me about it. But because of this combined sewer overflow issue, meaning sewage, raw sewage being released into rivers and it affecting our waterways, I thought this is very fascinating to me because the reason we have those releases is because the system becomes inundated and it becomes inundated during storms. So usually we can handle the sewage and put it into the water system and it gets treated and it's not released out into the river. But when there's a storm, it becomes overwhelmed. And so how could we manage better storm drainage along with a combined sewer overflow system? This is what became fascinating to me, believe it or not, during my master's degree at University of Pennsylvania. By the way, I started doing that because NBC said they would take care of the bill as a perk. I did that. But my actual degree is in environmental sciences with a emphasis on water and how stormwater in particularly affects water quality. And so I'm very passionate about this topic. I think that someday we will have water regulation similar to air quality regulation, meaning if there's poor air quality, there'll be an alert, similar to water. If there is a storm coming at the same time that there'll be an inundation, people will be alerted and they will either hold back on their water release or hold back on pesticide treatment, different things that would impact our rivers and waterways. Because final topic on this, Michael, we are living in a planet that is a closed system. That means all the water that we have on this planet is all the water we've got to work with. The dinosaurs had the same water that we do today. So we have to take care of the water and have ways to filtrate it correctly and clean it so that we can all be using it all the time. So there's my dissertation on water, but thank you for asking.
Well, what's normally not talked about elsewhere is always talked about on this show, and that's me being a nerd and wanting to know. And you learn something new all the time. Because it's funny you bring that up, because I remember watching. I love the show Cops. I grew up watching it all the time, every Saturday, particularly at my grandmother's house. There's an old episode from the '90s in Tampa where they were getting stolen cars and literally dredging them out of the water. And one of the officers that's dredging them out of the local river, where these kids would take them for joyrides and dump them, so that there was no evidence, if you will.
Right.
Was he mentioned that it's not good that so many of these cars end up in the water, because their products are not only in that water contaminating it for the local wildlife, but we drink from that water. So that's a different note, but it's good to your point about regulations, it's good to potentially put those in effect. And I can't see a future where they're not in effect, right? It makes too much sense not to.
Yeah, I like to talk about it to politicians a lot, but the thing about water that is difficult for people to understand is that when you and I, well, you're a little younger than I am, but I was growing up, my dad always said, turn off the lights, turn off the lights, turn off the lights, don't leave the lights on, turn everything off. When you were growing up, I bet your parents and your teachers said, turn off the water faucet.
Yep, they did.
The water faucet, don't leave the water faucet going while you brush your teeth. You learned about water conservation. We learned about electricity conservation. These types of things are generational. So as you've learned about water quality issues, this is because it's the biggest thing we'll be facing in the next 20 to 25 years is water quality, especially out west, but also for us here on the East Coast.
Good point. And it's funny you bring that up again. They used to give PSAs on Nickelodeon. In between episodes of SpongeBob, a commercial like that would pop up talking about water conservation. So you just unlocked a childhood memory I forgot I had. So in 2007, you go to Chicago's Fox affiliate, where, again, you're working in the Windy City. Again, another big market, another great market, unique people, sports markets there is pretty awesome as well. Multiple baseball teams, a basketball team everybody loves. Of course, you got the Bears there too, who you worked for doing their weather forecast for a little bit. But those winters, I got to say, now I'm on the East Coast, we both are. And these Connecticut winters and those New York winters are quite difficult. But we can't complain compared to the Windy City. So that first winter in Chicago, tell me about how you survived that, even as somebody that grew up in the Midwest.
I'm going to say it's brutal because the humidity combined with the snow is much different than Denver, where it's a dry cold. It's different. It was hard in Philadelphia to get used to the winters, but I think that my love of weather actually helped me survive, if you will, the winters. I became really ingrained in the science of meteorology when I went to Chicago, because I was a chief meteorologist for the Fox affiliate there that had purchased a brand new radar. It was a dual polarity radar, which means it would scan both horizontally and vertically. So it really got a good look at storms. And so I covered a lot of big snowstorms in those years up against Tom Skilling, who was at the competitive station there. And it really forced me to live and die by the forecast in a way. I wanted to be accurate so much living in Chicago with those big snows that came through that I really committed myself to it. Now, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun in Chicago as well. You mentioned the two baseball teams, threw out pitch for the Wrigley Field, the Cubs, and I threw out a pitch for the White Sox as well, first pitch. Love both those teams. And of course, I took meteorology into Soldier Field, where they put me up on the Jumbotron to talk about the weather at a football game. This was incredible. If you are an NFL fan, this will maybe surprise you. weather truly is a home field advantage. Not only would I give the fans a look at what was going to be happening at Soldier Field, by the way, which is off Lake Michigan, the winds are very important during the game, but I would provide information to the team. If they needed wind direction, where the winds were coming in and off the field, all of this can be applied to something as simple as the flip of the coin before the game starts. Because if the winds are going to switch during the game, you have all the advantage knowing that information. Not to mention NFL players, as tough as they might seem, they don't want to be cold very often. So the number of layers that they wear, and also they do treatments on their skin to protect them from the cold in climates like Chicago. They also put special spikes on their shoes in NFL, meaning if you're playing on a bluegrass, it's different than a turf. And you need to know what you're facing during the game with your spikes, because it's very difficult to untape the football shoe and put the different spikes in. So providing some of that information was a good advantage for the players. And I really enjoyed doing that. And I learned a lot about football as well. You had, let's see, who was the quarterback when I was in?
Jay Cutler.
That's right, Jay Cutler. And there were a lot of great players during that time. I had such a good time working with that team in particular. And yeah, good memories of the Chicago Bears.
Oh, yeah, Jay Cutler was quarterback during that time. They had prime Brian Urlacher, too.
Yeah, big guy. This guy was enormous. He was such a huge human. Right down there on the field with those guys, right behind the kicker and the snapper. Mm-hmm. I would there. And sometimes the equipment manager would bring me either something to stand on, like a cardboard, or they would also bring over sand sometimes. Very rarely, though, would I get the heaters turned in my direction. That cold side of the sidelines.
And Devin Hester was on that team too. Greatest return man of all time. He infamously returned back a kick for a touchdown in the Super Bowl. But it's funny you mentioned the wind stream, because I'm a diehard baseball fan too. I'm a Yankee fan, and we suck this year. But that being said, I would always pay attention to that, especially in October when the playoffs would come around, because if they're saying the wind's blowing out or blowing in, that affects the trajectory of a fly ball. And I'll never forget, about 6 years ago now almost, it's game 3 of the ALCS, Yankees-Astros, Yankee Stadium. Todd Frazier, who was our third baseman at the time, hits a fly ball that normally in July would have been an easy fly out to end the inning. It went into the jet stream, went out for a 3-run home run. The wind was blowing, I believe, out that night, carried the ball out. So sometimes even in baseball, too, you see that effect. To your point, it is an advantage.
Absolutely. There are so many stadiums that are actually built. The newest stadiums are actually built often with some sort of advantage to the home team, where they understand how the winds are going to work in the stadium. Sometimes it's the position that the stadium is put in. Sometimes it's the design of the stadium itself. Really interesting, a big factor in baseball. And the players that understand this, it almost works the same way as Moneyball. Remember when they had the Brad Pitt movie and they talked about statistics affecting baseball? Well, same thing with weather. Certain players play better in certain types of weather. It's a fascinating science to be applied. And anybody who's a better or a true fan who wants to understand players, the weather can be a secret weapon in knowing what they might do. I mean, I remember at Soldier Field, they played the Packers, and the guy Brett Favre was near the end of his career with the Packers, and he said that the Soldier Field game that he played December before he retired was the coldest he'd ever been, and did play a factor in his decision to retire.
Wow. And he was in Green Bay all those years. So imagine him saying that. That really says something. Talking with Amy Freeze here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. She can do weather. She can talk sports. Which can't she do, of course? So that brings us into 2011. And like I mentioned earlier, all those previous markets you worked in, big in their own right, Denver, Chicago, and certainly your time in Philadelphia prepared you well for New York City, which, as I said earlier, is the flagship. So that moment, it doesn't matter who you are. It's a big time step. It's one that can be a bit nerve-wracking. And to my NYPD and FDNY friends in the chat who've been previous guests on this show, when they go to units like the rescue units of the FDNY or the emergency service unit or bomb squad of the NYPD, I always ask them, going to units like that, no matter how much experience you had prior, did you feel like a rookie all over again? So I'll tailor that question to you. Going to New York City, despite how long you've been in the game by that point, did you feel like a rookie all over again?
In some ways, yes. But the thing I did, I think that helped me as a rookie, if you will, is that I really dove into the city. I lived in Manhattan. I got to know all 5 boroughs, and I became a New Yorker. I had to develop that, right? Because I came from a small town in southern Indiana, but I took the subway. I, put my kids into public schools. I became a part of New York. And I really did everything I could to learn about the city, to learn about neighborhoods, to go places that everyday New Yorkers went. So I didn't keep myself in a box, just working in the city. I allowed myself to live in the city and work at the same time. Interesting fact that I'll tie right back into the FDNY. My first apartment on the Upper West Side, I was there with 4 children, and we hadn't lived in the city before. And there are a lot of things about living in a city that are different than a suburb. My youngest son was 3 at the time. I remember taking all 4 of the kids into the fire department down the street. It was 3540 right here on the Upper West Side. The cavemen.
Yep.
I said, guys, I wanted to ask you a little bit about safety in the city. What advice would you give us? Very quickly and friendly, they said, first, let's talk about safety on the streets. And they went over with my kids, safety in the streets, looking at the pedestrian go sign, not crossing when it's red, etc. Then we talked about fire safety. If there's a fire, what do you do in your apartment? We were living on the 21st floor of a high rise. Mm-hmm. They ingrained my kids into New York safety for the very first time. And I reminded them, this is where you can go to be safe at any time in the city. It was an immediate connection for me to have first responders available as if they were my neighbors. And I never forgot that almost welcome that they offered to me and my family. And since that time, obviously, we all respect the work that's done. But the first responders helped me become a part of New York City in my very own neighborhood. So I think that's the thing that really helped me do well at my job, because then I was able to go on TV and I could talk about the radar and how it was affecting Long Island City, or what it meant for Montauk, or what it meant in Westchester. I knew those neighborhoods. I knew those areas in and around the city and the suburbs surrounding, and it allowed me to do my job a lot better.
Oh, it motivates you when you realize who you're doing it for, right? Those are your viewers. Those are the people that are turning on the television to watch you, and they're relying on you. And with social media already being in full swing at that time when you came to New York City, they're interacting directly with you. So it only adds fuel to the fire, and it does make that process easier, because now you're not as nervous because you're so focused on doing a good job, and you have their support. It makes the process a lot easier. So I love that story. Thanks for sharing that.
You got it. Not to mention, I'm working with world-class broadcasters.
Yes.
I went to WABC Channel 7. Eyewitness News is the #1 local television station in the world. Mm-hmm. They're the most watched local news. And so I'm working with a place where there's been a long legacy of professional broadcasters. So it was very easy to look over to the side and have someone like Michelle Turlsworth there, your partner, because she immediately raises your game and makes you look good, makes you feel included. These are some of the best people in television, and I was able to be on their team, and immediately they accepted me and took me in, which helped me also succeed with the viewers.
Oh, and it's not just Michelle. Look who's there, and look at the legacy they have there individually, if you will, for a moment. Liz Cho, Bill Ritter, N.J. Burkett, Nina Pineda, Lauren Glassberg. They've been there forever, and I say that lovingly. So having people like that have been through the war, so to speak, and have had their own lumps and getting used to the city, it helps make that process a lot easier. And like you said, it's good to see that they were so welcoming to you. A couple questions, or not questions, rather comments, I should say, in the live chat of praise towards you from more viewers. The aforementioned Lieutenant Pranzo, have seen Amy for decades, remember her, the coolest gal. And Rick Martinez, retired NYPD Emergency Service Unit officer out of Truck 3 in the Bronx. Hey, Mike, tell Amy she does a great job, and I enjoy her reports. And that comes from Rick, great dude. And Jim Raftery, he has a picture when I put the promo out for the show on Facebook. Yep, he came by the studio one time, retired FDNY dispatcher, so he sends his regards. And I didn't forget to pass along that message to him. So good to see you in the chat, and thank you very much for tuning in. Now, 2011 and 2012 is an interesting time to get to New York City, because we get Irene in 2011, and that we felt the effects in the tri-state area. But then again, and got dwarfed the following year by the effects of Sandy. And Sandy really hit us hard. We were hoping it would turn out. And then it became apparent, as the days got closer, that this was not going to miss us and we were in for a direct hit. So I'll ask you the same question I asked Chris Cimino when I got him on a while ago. When you knew that that storm was going to make a direct impact in this area of the country, in the tri-state, tell me about the prep work to begin covering that and when it actually hit, shifting into, if you will, breaking news mode.
First of all, I appreciate the setup. You know your weather. Thank you for understanding the dynamics, because that is such a critical piece of the story of Superstorm Sandy. Because Irene performed in a different way than perhaps we expected this storm too, it did change the reference point for which people made decisions on Superstorm Sandy. So it's a great point. For us at WABC, covering with Lee Goldberg, Bill Evans, and Jeff Smith at the time, we did coverage straight for, I think, about 48 to 72 hours. We were at ABC 7 there in the studio taking shifts covering it. In the days leading up, there was a lot of evidence that this was going to be an impactful storm for the East Coast. But I knew the morning, about 24 hours before, when I saw a new product called the Storm Surge product. It was a future casting surge that showed how far the water would come up. When you talk about hurricanes, the most deadly part of a hurricane is the storm surge. What is storm surge? If you're standing at the beach and your toes are right at the water point, the surge is how far that water would come up from your toes to your body, or maybe even over top of your body. When I looked at the storm surge for Staten Island, and I took it over to the desk and I showed Michelle Charlesworth and Phil Liboff at the time, I said, look at the storm surge. This storm surge shows part of Staten Island is covered in water. The next day, Michelle chose to go out there for a location. She was there when the big tanker went ashore. But when I saw that the storm surge prediction models were giving so much flooding to places like the Rockaways, I knew this was going to be a storm like we hadn't seen before. A lot of times when you see water predictions, it's hard to believe it, especially if it hasn't happened in modern times. But the computer models did predict accurately the storm surge and the danger of Superstorm Sandy. It was a perfect conglomerate of everything coming together. But I think that we gave a good forecast. The National Weather Service put out terrific warnings for that particular storm, meaning they were accurate. But the problem is exactly what you described, is a lot of people use the reference of Irene or even other events, and they said, it hasn't flooded at my house before. Oh, they said it was going to flood last time. I'm not going to go this time because I didn't have a problem last time. And this was absolutely a lesson that not only turned out to be fateful for some, but is one that we still talk about today. Never judge storms by a reference storm, because every storm is different. They bring new threats every single time. Learning about that storm and forecasting it, and then the follow-up, the recovery stories, which basically I just did another hour-long special with Fox Weather about this on the anniversary. So it's a never-ending story to me, because Superstorm Sandy forever changed some of the shorelines for us here on the East Coast, and it altered the way we respond to storms in New York City, and for a positive way that I think in the future will not only buoy us up, but it will save lives. I recently went to this hospital here on the east side of Manhattan, Langone, and I'm telling you, it's a fortress. If there's a storm coming between you, me, and the crowd listening, I'd run to the hospital real fast, because it's never going to flood over there again.
No, of course, some good did come out of it. And it's interesting because I imagine that that made you feel even more embedded in the fabric of New York. You weren't in New York necessarily when 9/11 hit and the resilience of the city was on full display in the days and months afterwards, but you were in New York for this. And after having gone through that, I imagine that you really felt like even more of a New Yorker afterwards.
Yes, people remember when you talk about something and then it actually happens to them. But also when we went and did the follow-up stories, you were in the neighborhood. So, I went out to the Rockaways and saw the neighborhood completely burned down after Superstorm Sandy. But in the months following, as it started to rebuild, I was there for the rebuilds. I was there for the building up of the beaches. I was there for the restoration of businesses coming back to life over the years, which did take several years for many of the communities. And
of course.
Yeah, being a part of that is just as impactful as getting people prepared for the storm.
Oh, of course, of course. Talking with Amy Freeze here on the Mike to New Haven podcast. Now, one thing I did want to ask you about is that covering a pandemic for those that were on the front lines of the crisis involving the sickness itself and the effects it was having on the hospital is one thing. But during these crises, I should say, weather almost becomes nullified, not in the sense that it's not important, but almost, what do you say during a time like this? So covering the weather when people are thinking, understandably, because they're so stressed out, what does the forecast have to do with this? Tell me about your 2020 and how odd that was.
Well, it was odd for me because I was in a situation where I was the only forecaster at Channel 7 that was actually going into the station. The other meteorologists were primarily spending some time working from home. I think actually Jeff might have been coming in. Anyway, there was a limited number of us that were coming in. I only lived 7 blocks from the TV station. So I didn't have anything to overcome other than walking down the street to get over to the TV station. So I was going in, providing the forecast, but everything was so removed. We weren't, as broadcasters, we weren't even in a 30-foot radius of each other if we were in the studio. And I think, if anything, the forecast became a calming mechanism for the COVID period. And you know what? It always is, because when you look at weather, it should be either a call to action or a calming voice. This is something you need to worry about, or this is not going to be a big deal. This storm is going to miss us. So those two factors are always at play when you're talking about the weather. But particularly during COVID, this was an opportunity of the forecast to just reassure people that the sun is coming up. The sun is coming up. It is warm outside. It is cold outside. Whatever's happening, there are some things that are still the norm of the world.
Yeah, no, and that's important. And we were certainly clinging to those in 2020 and 2021. And it's interesting to look back on that now, some 3 years later, after it all began in March of 2020. I remember watching the NBA that night. I think it was the Thunder against the Jazz, and they evacuated the arena. I'm thinking, what, is somebody calling a bomb threat or something? And
Right.
then no, it's Rudy Gobert getting sick. Unfortunately, which kicked off everything of that time period, at least here in the United States. You left WABC in October of 2020. 9 years there, a lot of wonderful memories. How hard was that for you?
It was difficult. It was hard to leave because I just loved it so much and was such a part of the family there. But they made an offer to me at Fox Weather that I could not refuse. And so the folks at WABC gave me their blessing and said, this is a wonderful opportunity for you, and the door is always open here. So that was a wonderful vote of confidence that I was making the right decision. And I see my friends at WABC all the time still. And what I've been able to bring to my career at Fox Weather has been so much growth and so much knowledge that it was a thing that I would not have been able to do at WABC, covering a local forecast. At Fox Weather, we've launched a stream. We're covering it coast to coast in a 24-hour weather cycle, and I'm doing it with a team of meteorologists. So for folks who don't know, a lot of people are familiar with Fox News Channel, but the Fox platforms or Fox Media covers Fox Business, Fox Sports, Fox Entertainment, and of course now Fox Weather. So it's a brand that they launched along with the other components of it. It's funny to me because a lot of times, I hope I can say this, I don't know, but people will associate Fox News Channel with, oh, I don't watch those politics. And I say to myself, well, do you watch the World Series? Because Fox also hosts the World Series. So different with Fox Weather, it's not associated with politics. We're able to cover the weather full time. And I don't have crime and politics in and outside of the stories I'm doing. Instead, it really is science focused and forecast based conversation with colleagues that have come in from really all over the country.
No, and it's funny. It reminds me of the old Michael Jordan line, right? Republicans and Democrats, they both buy shoes. It kind of applies here. Republicans and Democrats, they both watch the forecast. They both want to know how they should prepare for the weather. So it's true. It's educational, which I like about it. Excuse me. And it's true because not only is there the World Series on Fox, there's also the Super Bowl in some years too. So There you
Right.
go. You're either way, you're going to be watching it. And like I said earlier, what show did I grow up loving and watching and still watch? Cops, which is on Fox every Saturday night, or at least back then it was. So 2 years now at Fox Weather and 12 years overall in New York City. I imagine, I mean, the time has flown by, but you have to look back with so much pride. Basically, yeah, I made it. You had a great team, of course, and you credit it to them, and I appreciate that. But there has to be a tremendous amount of joy with what you've been able to do and what's still left to do. There's a lot more to do.
There is. I look back at some of the highlights that I've had over the last 12 years, doing everything from being out of the Jones Beach Air Show and flying with the Blue Angels, taking G's in a fighter jet, to, going into amazing circumstances that, you just in normal situations don't get to be a part of. But because I have had the avenue of being in New York City, you get the front row seat to do things. And so that has been an incredible opportunity, and something that's not missed on me as the special part of the job.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
confusion sometimes comes in television. I think you'll be able to relate to this, Mike. Sometimes people get confused and they think they are special. No, the job is special. And the job is special because it brings you into arenas, into the lives of people that you may not have been able to enter had you not had the job. So the job is really the thing that makes it special. And if you remember that and keep yourself in a level playing field here, you'll remember all the things that you're gaining as well as giving during a broadcast career like this. So I've really, really felt fortunate to be in New York. I feel, in, I guess, 4 years, I will have been in New York City longer than any other city. I'm saying something. I've lived in 8 states as an adult. So New York will, in a few short years, be the place that I've lived the longest in my life.
And that's quite the milestone. It's funny, and I can relate to it, right? Because a lot of this show is primarily first responder interviews, and I do news and sports interviews as well, but a majority of it is police and fire. And cops and firemen all the time walk up to me, or they text me, or they'll tell me on social media, "I love your show. You do such a great job." And it's like, same thing. I always tell them, it's not me. I just get the guest on. I ask them questions about their career, kind of like I'm doing tonight, and the guest drives the show. And it's their story. They tell it how they see fit. I just know when to shut up and stay out the way. And that's really it. And as long as I love what you said there.
Pretty prepared, though. You're pretty skilled at it.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But like you said, as long as you remain level-headed, it goes a long way. Before I get to the concluding segment, which is the rapid fire, good question here in the chat from Steve Iorado. And he's saying, did Amy ever do a segment on how weather affects fires, either structure or wildland? Steve's a fireman. That's why he asked this, since she brought up what happened in the Rockaways during Sandy and now what's happening in Maui.
Great question. Wildfires are a huge part of the coverage that we're doing on Fox Weather because of what happened in Lahaina. But for me, wildfire coverage has been a part of something that I've done in every single market that I've worked in, every single television job, because wildfires, small or big, are a part of weather infrastructure. What spread the fire so very quickly in Maui was the wind. It was created by a high pressure system to the north. I think initially, and probably fairly, the initial reaction was, oh, Hurricane Dora going to the south is what's causing this. No, that storm was too far to the south. It was actually high pressure system to the north. Maybe Dora was holding the high pressure in position, but I think when they go back and do the study, they'll see very clearly that it was the high pressure system to the north that increased the winds that went in between the two volcanic systems there through Lahaina. And those winds went up to 82 miles an hour. That's what spread the fire at, get this, a mile a minute. So when Lahaina was sparked with the blaze, it was the winds that carried that blaze. What was happening was they did not turn off the electrical power grid like they do in California. And so there in Hawaii, with the electrical power grid still going, as those power lines snapped, there were fuses snapping all the way. And it was happening at such a rapid pace. That's why it overtook the town. And remember, it was happening in the dark of night. Right. So even if people heard the wind or they heard a storm, they may not have associated the severity or complexity to what was actually happening at the time. But yeah, wildfires are a big part of coverage. I can think back especially to my time in Colorado, covering a lot of foothill fires there. And, it's I spent some time in California too, in Southern California early in my career, and the wildfires there, which happened back in the early 90s, were very, very detrimental to different communities. We learned a lot about fires and containing fires in the early 90s. But yeah, it's a big part of the story. And because I love the FDNY and I have close up seen their work for the last decade or more, I do understand how difficult it is to fight a fire in a city. But applying that to wildfires is a whole different scenario. One time I went to New Jersey. This is very interesting. Mm-hmm. I went to the volunteer wildfire group out in the middle of New Jersey. They cover the Pine Barrens. Mike, this is so jaw-dropping. New Jersey Pine Barrens are probably the biggest natural disaster awaiting the East Coast. What? A wildfire? Yes, more so than flooding or a hurricane or a snowstorm. Because in the Pine Barrens along the Jersey Shore, you've got about an inch or two of fuel on the forest floor. What that means is without the proper forest, it's when you go in, you do controlled burns. If you don't properly manage a forest, it becomes fuel tender, right? This forest drops its leaves, drops its pine needles, and you've got an inch or two of fuel waiting to burn. And if you think about the way the Pine Barrens are designed, there's only one way in and one way out a lot of these communities. And you have a volunteer fire source that's looking over fire towers. It's very difficult. We had some early spring and early summer fires in New Jersey that were very dangerous. And it's only because of the skill of the wildfire fighting that's going on in New Jersey with a lot of volunteer staff, by the way, and outdated equipment. We need to refund this. It's a big deal. But these guys are so skilled. They're watching it. And this is a very dangerous situation. The Pine Barrens could be lit on fire, not only impacting hundreds of thousands of people that live in the Pine Barrens, but also there's not a lot of area. If you go down the Jersey Shore, you know the roads are very narrow there to get in and out. And all of it would be fed coming into New York City and highly populated areas of I-95. This is a whole dissertation we could do a second show on.
Yeah, if you, whenever you want to, you can come right on back and we could talk about this. And I'm sure some of my FDNY friends in the chat and friends from the fire service all over would be happy to chime in as well. Well, the hour's flown by and we'll end as we always end. And this has been a great conversation with you. I've enjoyed it immensely with the rapid fire. So it's 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You could say pass if you want. Are you ready? Okay, first, I know you mentioned you would have been a veterinarian, so you can't say that here. If not for meteorology or that, what other career could you have seen yourself pursuing and enjoying?
Oh, this is so easy. I could have gone after the bad guys. I could have gotten an NYPD badge because I'd be able to say, freeze.
There you go. Love that answer. Second, as a kid, funniest thing you ever got in trouble for?
Ooh, this is a good one. Well, this is kind of funny. When I was probably in my late teens, we went to a fancy hotel. And do you know, sometimes they put the robe, the white robe.
Yeah.
Well, I decided to roll it up and take it home. Parents got the bill. So I think I was thinking I would create a little of that same luxury at home. And so I took the robe home, but let's just say I ended up paying for it in a different way.
No, it reminds me of an episode of SpongeBob where SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs take the entire hotel room. And the manager asked him, did you take everything in the room? He's like, no, we just exaggerated it. So there you go. You were just exaggerating it. Third, best advice anyone ever gave you?
Oh, this is an interesting one. First of all, my parents have given me great advice over the years, and I really attribute any success I've had in life to great parents, my mom and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Freeze, if you will. But outside of my family, this might be interesting to some, but when I was in Philadelphia, it was an NBC affiliate, and they had the show on Apprentice, which of course was Donald Trump.
Yes.
And this was a very successful show, The Apprentice, when he was on it.
I liked it. I watched it.
We're going to fly you to LA and you're going to interview Howie Mandel for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on the set. Was fantastic. And you're also going to be able to interview Donald Trump about The Apprentice. I not only got to interview Donald Trump, in person, I got to go on his plane because I was late to the interview and he had already gotten onto the plane. I was the last person. They said, okay, let her come on. I interviewed him on his plane. And Melania, his wife, was there at the time, and fantastic pilot I got to meet as well. But I interviewed him and I said, you're hosting all these young people on your show, The Apprentice. Do you have any advice for them? You certainly do criticize them a lot. They're in difficult predicaments, but do you ever give any advice? Do you have one special thing that you take to heart that you give to others? And he says, well, it's very easy for me. The best advice I've ever gotten, which I'll give you right now, is never give up. Never give up. Sounds simple, right? Mm-hmm. Well, anything you want to say about the politics of Donald Trump, the one thing you can look back and say is that this guy's had a lot of failure along the road, but he's never given up. And he's always putting forth an effort for whatever's going on. So politics aside, it's the best piece of information. He said, if you don't give up, there's always a chance that you can come out a winner. And so I think that is great advice at any stage of the game that you're in, is that you don't give up. Even when things seem hard, even when it seems like it's a tough road in front of you, even when it seems like a lot of people are against you, you might even make some wrong choices. Don't give up, because you can turn things around. And so I think that is wonderful advice. I give it to my kids as well, is don't give up. Never give up.
Oh, I love it. And as somebody that grew up a WWE fan, what was John Cena's slogan? Exactly that, never give up. John Cena would say it all the time. He wear it on his shirt, still does whenever he makes appearances, I should say. So very much true.
I think it's a great gift to give people hope. And so that's
absolutely.
Advice, never give up, gives people hope.
Absolutely. Fourth, and this is where you can say multiple. You don't have to pick one. Favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Oh my gosh, this is tough. Oh my gosh. Well, the city is Manhattan to me. But if I could choose any place in all 5 boroughs.
Yes, absolutely.
I would go to Rockaway, to the beach. I love going to the beach. I take the ferry to the beach, and I love Claudette's Cuisine on 116th Street. Her food is fantastic. She is lovely. And I love the atmosphere of Rockaway Beach.
Oh, there you go. Not a bad place to eat. Not a bad place to eat at all. Fifth and finally, we can kind of expand on the third question. Besides never giving up, if you can go back in time and give advice to a younger version of yourself, what would you tell a young Amy Freeze?
Keep a journal. Keep a journal. Write it down. You think you're going to remember everything. I was good at keeping a journal as a teenager. In fact, I still have those journals, and I look back and I kept meticulous notes on friends, places I went, vacations I took with my parents. Even into my early 20s, I had a pretty decent journal that I would keep. Somewhere along the line, I got too busy. I have recently returned to journaling. And I think that this is a very important thing, because we think we're going to remember people, places, feelings, and we don't. We just can't remember everything. I think that social media helps us to a degree, but it's allowing us to remember the highlights, the things we truly want everyone else to see. Writing in a journal and keeping a record allows us to maintain a personal or private thing that is within us that we keep a record of. And you revisit those feelings, you can see growth. You can go back to a time where you need strength that you had. I think it's really great. Several stories along the lines is Barbara Walters was interviewed by Oprah at the end of her time when she was about ready to retire from The View. And Oprah said, you've done everything. You've interviewed so many people. Do you have any regrets? Barbara Walters said, I wish I had written down more. I wish I had kept a journal. And this is a woman who lived her life on television. So she even saw the value in what you can do in writing down. If anybody's seen the play, Alexander Hamilton, Broadway show, famous worldwide now. This entire story, sort of about the Revolution and the Founding Fathers, but what it's truly about is the wife of Alexander Hamilton, who wrote down his story, who wrote down the things. She kept the letters. She made a history of the things that happened in his life, and that is how he's remembered. So if we want to have a story that is remembered about our life, we've got to be willing to write that down. So keeping a journal is the thing I would say, Amy, you never give up on the journal. Keep it going. I try to read as much as I can.
There you go. Love it. This has been, like I said, this has been wonderful. It was well worth the wait to get you on, my friend. Stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. But before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you'd like to give?
I do definitely want to say to all the first responders out there, whatever agency that you're a part of, we appreciate you. You are important. Your sacrifice is recognized. In the climate of today, in some of the difficult circumstances that we've been presented with, there are people that believe in the first responders, they believe in the system, and they are on your side. So there are people rooting for you. I'm among them. And if there's anything that I can do in my part to help support that cause or feeling of thankfulness and gratitude towards first responders, I definitely want to put it out there. Last thing I'll tell you, Mike, I didn't realize this until maybe about 5 years ago. As a teenager in a small town in southern Indiana, you might think, how did you get out of southern Indiana, Amy? I was in a very small town called Jeffersonville. And there's probably a lot of kids that I went to school with that are still in that town. I think that's kind of cool because you get to grow up with the people that you were around and you live your whole life someplace. But if you want to break out of a small town, you've got to have an opportunity, right? My opportunity was I entered a beauty pageant. Kind of funny, right? But in order to enter the beauty pageant, I had to have sponsors. Do you know who sponsored me?
Who?
Local fire department. I still have the picture of me in a pageant dress next to the 2 firefighters, and they had taken a collection at the local fire department to support a high school senior to go and do a pageant. That pageant gave me opportunities in scholarship. It gave me confidence. I went away to school, and I've been able to live an exciting life because people supported me in my community. I'll never forget that. And I hope that people remember what goes around comes around. There are always paybacks in life. We don't know how the butterfly flapping its wings creates a storm or a rainbow somewhere on the planet, but it's true. Everything is connected. And so I bring that back to the first responders and to you, that's a really important part of how I got where I am today, is that a community fire department believed in me. Here I am.
Here you are. Here you are. Wonderful. Wonderful. Like I said, this was great. Stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air. And thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight. I don't want to give individual shout outs because I'm afraid I'll miss somebody in the live chat, which I would feel very bad about. But collectively, to all of you via Twitter, via LinkedIn, and via YouTube, thank you very much for tuning in. I certainly appreciate it. Excuse me. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast live this Friday at 7. Started his career at the NYPD, rolled over into the Yonkers Police Department. Currently is chief of the MTA Police. And that for volume 2 of Mike the New Haven miniseries, The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, is current MTA Police Chief John Muller. Again, this Friday, 7 o'clock. In the meantime, on behalf of Amy Freeze, I'm Mike Colón. Thanks for tuning in once again. And we will see you next time. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your night.